I want to mention too, when it comes to focus, but it's true here also, the good work, the good work of physical conditioning, like a deadlift, is is in pulling that weight up, and controlled deceleration down is good too. But really the hardest part, if I just dropped weights all the time, that'd be easy. The hard part is pulling them up.
Yeah.
The same is true of social connection. The same is true of our focus. The good work is done when we realize that our spotlight of attention is not where it needs to be. That moment, oh, I got distracted again, and we pull it back to this moment.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is the Director of Sports Psychology at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He has an extensive background in military application. I've had the honor and privilege to collaborate with him in my work with the Positive Coaching Alliance. He's also both extensively knowledgeable in both the research and applied fields of psychology. I'm excited to have him join us. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Dillon Small. Today.
Hey, I'm well. It's a beautiful day in Colorado Springs. Summer's incredible. It's hard. I love my job, love to be here, but it's hard not being outside. I'll tell you that.
No doubt. Definitely excited to have you on. For those listeners that are avid listeners, we got a chance to kind of do some collaboration through Positive Coaching Alliance and work with the Academy. So I got to know Dillon a little bit through that. But to help our listeners understand it and learn a little bit about you, share a little bit what led you into the field of psychology and the work you do. And then we'd love to hear a little bit more about, what your role at the Air Force Academy entails.
Yeah, for sure. I think like any of us on our journey, sometimes we feel like it's all clear and cut out, and then all of a sudden it gets cloudy and convoluted. And so we just take the next step and figure it out as we go. That's true of me. I had a high school teacher that taught a few classes, but one of them was psychology, and really dialed in a lot to some of the social psychology elements of human behavior. I was fascinated by it. And then I began to think I could see some of that social psychology bear out and, as like advertisements on TV or the way classmates would behave. And so that was someone in my life that got me interested in the social sciences anyway. And so I went to University of Nebraska for my undergrad, a R1 school, did a lot of research as just like a undergrad. And, occasionally I'd be like the 15th name on a publication we got sent out. I remember feeling excited about psychology. I was a part of some of the academic clubs there early in my undergrad, but throughout undergrad became more and more disillusioned with psychology. I felt like we were doing all this research. I was learning all of this kind of theory and then talking about practice, and I didn't see any of the practice happening. It felt very much like we created a system that serviced ourselves just to kind of bolster the field of psychology without any technical or tactical help to those people we were researching. And clearly kind of my mentors and the academic structure there was really in service to research and teaching, and not so much the applied field. I just didn't even really have a model for what applied psychology looked like in undergrad, but I knew research design. I knew how to run stats. I had a good friend at the time that had was getting his PhD in organizational psychology at the University of Nebraska. And he said, well, hey, I think you'd really be good at this, and I think you'd like that more. He did his master's at Ball State University out in Indiana. And so he said, you should just apply. I thought going more of an organizational route was going to be something I was interested in, and was lucky to head out there for a master's. Got to teach a lot while I was there, did some fun research. this happened to be the season where Ball State football went undefeated. They
Hmm,
were showing
okay.
up in the preseason and postseason rankings. It was like a brand new thing for the Cardinals out there. So it was fun to kind of like follow a bit of like their trajectory. But it was in graduate school for my that first master's that I began to understand the applied elements of psychology to help organizations and structures work more efficiently and productively, and also continued to refine my desire to work in an applied setting, bringing the science and practice of psychology to populations, structures, and individuals that could benefit from it. I then went out to Los Angeles, got my master's and doctorate in clinical psychology. And it was as I was heading out that way that the Army, Navy, and Air Force came knocking, and they said, "Hey, we have this health profession scholarship program for a few folks that show some interest in the field and some promise for the purposes we're getting after, and we'd like you to apply." So there's kind of an application interview process. Got picked up for a few of them. We picked Air Force for a few reasons that I could talk about later. And so it was really lucky, I think, to fall into that and have the school paid for. But also, while I was in school, I was in the reserves. So I got to drive down to Camp Pendleton, do some work in that area, learn a lot about the role of attentional control of our focus and concentration and where we can put our mindsets. Was lucky to be a part of some research in mindfulness with some special operators in Marine Special Forces, that's MARSOC, and Air Force Special Forces, that's AFSOC. And from there, got entree into the military population, commissioned, and was active duty Air Force for about 10 years. I was in the med group for a few of those years. It's called the medical group, basically our mental health clinic. But my heart really was pulled toward individuals that were pushing boundaries of performance day in and day out, oftentimes in hostile, uncertain, austere environments. The training was so well locked and loaded in the body. They knew how to do the skills that they've been trained, and their bodies were really finely tuned to go execute the mission because of the training. They could carry large packs. They knew how to slackline or pull off a rope. I mean, they knew how to do things with the body. And that element of the mental conditioning, I think, is a newer performance domain, certainly for our military, because we are sort of weary. We're uncertain of our psychologists. We're afraid that the medical community is going to take us off of a pilot qualification or hinder us from our next job opportunity. So taking the pathology model of psychology and pushing it into the performance model of psychology was really a fun thing for me, and early in my career, I guess. And from there was able to just keep tagging in different assignments where we worked with people on the cutting edge of certainly the physical domain and the cognitive domain, but also the science domain. So looking at brand new airframes, ways of thinking about how to fly, getting someone that's used to flying an old model, it's kind of like an old Corvette where you feel everything. You feel the brakes, you feel the steering, and pushing into a Tesla where you're now pushing buttons and it kind of does it on its own. So how do we shift the mental model of driving one to driving the other? Got to move to the Air Force Academy in 2017 and help run our peak performance center. And then for a lot of reasons, my values changed, restructured a bit, I'll say. I'm a dad and a husband first now. I got 3 kiddos and a wife and care deeply about them. So we wanted to stay in the Springs, and a civilian job opened up here at the Air Force Academy. So I get to be the director of sport performance psychology. At the same time, I'm a commander for the aerospace medicine unit up at the 140th at Buckley Space Force. We have a fighter wing up there. Once a month, I get to put the uniform on and still run around with our flyers, which is a lot of fun. So, Tyler, big, long, protracted
that's
maneuvering through how I'm here now. Yeah,
I learned a little bit more, but one little nuance to sidetrack on. I, do a little research, even though I knew you. You're a lover of unleaded coffee. Is that a reference to decaf?
Yeah, so I have to moderate my caffeine intake, and so if I if I have yeah, I think a high motor that's fed fully leaded coffee tends to just overblow the motor. So
No, it's
I had a roommate, Tyler. We're going deep here. These are like these are deep tracks. But I had a roommate for when I was getting my first master's, and he was like an expert coffee roaster. He would
okay.
actually go compete in barista ing, I think. So
Yeah.
I'd go with him, but it's hard not to become a coffee snob when you live with someone who roasts coffee
Yeah.
and also learn how much caffeine I can and can't take. So I figured out how to really enjoy my coffee, but I need to watch my caffeine intake.
Yeah, you probably put you taste this.
That's exactly right.
No, it is definitely one of the sidetrack topics we enjoy on this podcast is when
Yeah.
people have but yeah, I only over the last year and a half did I first start drinking decaf because I was like, all right, lower my intake after,
Yeah.
later in the day because I do like coffee
Yep.
and all that. But for years I was like, what's the point of coffee with what I didn't understand decaf for most of my life. I've
I
come
know.
to know it a little bit better this year. So
Yep.
yeah, gotta stay whatever keeps your fuel fueling. Um, you talked about focus, and I did see there's a thing you had created at one point kind of called the 7-day playbook.
Uh-huh.
I think so many coaches, athletes, in such a distracted world, different world, uh, it's a challenge for all of us. I think what do they compare us to, like, lab rats, our attention spans and certain things. We're pretty close to some animals. But what are some core elements in that playbook? I'd love to hear kind of, things that we can do as athletes and coaches to uh, help our focus.
Yeah. Yeah, Tyler, great question. Boy, you did some research. That's true. I'm curious. Yeah. What else is going to pop out here in the questions? Tyler, just like we train our body and we condition the body, and just like we train sport performance, we can train the brain. We can train the physical structure that is the brain, and from the outflow of that also comes the psychology. I've said before in a few talks I've given, a profound experience I had was in a brain cutting when I was in residency. We went to a cadaver lab at Wright State University, and there was a human body, and we extracted the brain out, and I can remember holding this brain, and I think it was particularly profound. We had just given birth to our first kiddo, and I'm surrounded by hundreds of bodies. It's one of the largest cadaver donation
Well,
labs in the US. It was this odd juxtaposition of life and feeling like life is both precious and fleeting. I'm holding this brain in my hands, and I can remember thinking that I don't know much about this human laying in front of me. And yet, in my hands I've got their memories, what made them
yeah,
cry and laugh, what lullabies did they get sung when they're falling asleep at night as a kid. Um,
yeah,
there's so much that I had in my hand, and I had zero access to it. And part of what we were looking at is some of the vasculature and maybe some of the reasons that they had died. It was this strange interplay between the physical structure of the brain and then also my world, which is psychology, the outflow of behavior and thoughts and emotions. We 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 probably don't prioritize or honor training our brain in the same way that we honor and prioritize training our body as athletes.
yeah.
We get nutrition and hydration, we get active recovery and rest, and I think we expect our brain just to follow along, like it'll naturally figure it out. When it comes to focus, Tyler, we are detraining our brain every single day when we don't have an intentional way ahead
Yeah.
to recognize that the brain needs cared for and it needs trained. And instead, we pick up the phone without realizing it. We're hungry for quick hit news bites. We feel some kind of edification or connection when someone pops a little like on our text message and it shows up on our watch. Or conversely, we feel lonely or isolated if we don't get the feedback because someone left us on red. I think we decondition our brain's ability to dial into what really matters in this moment and be expertly attuned to it, because the world pulls us away from it. It just
Yeah.
does. It's asking us to constantly pay attention to other things. And if I'm not careful, I could get on a soapbox about how much monetary our value, our attention has. And we don't track it that way. I mean, I don't think, okay, today I devoted X amount of minutes to things that don't matter, but
Right.
Microsoft or Instagram or whatever, they made this much money off of that attention.
Yeah.
I think that the first principle, the first thing, yeah, in that playbook is really honoring that we have detrained the physical structure of the brain. We don't
Yeah.
care for or take or train it well, and the outflow of that is our psychology. It's our mood.
Yeah.
It's our intention. It's our goal focus. It's our ability to stay dialed into something for a concerted period of time. And I don't know if do you resonate with that as I
Yeah,
say it.
I don't know if you're another coach recommended it to me. I just started reading it, and it's like, yeah, a book called Anxious Generation,
Ah, yes.
and he talks about, kind of, he references the time frame of 2010 to 2015 of like really this great rewiring.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of made me think of, exactly this, like, of attention. And I think there's even, Sean Parker, who's, I think, Justin Timberlake in the movie Facebook, like
Oh,
he's
okay.
he's he's said that, that actual Sean Parker came, had said in an interview that, they designed this to be a social feedback loop. And so kids and adults have been trained to, that's where you go get it, instead of your real face-to-face communities. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think the focus, someone else shared with me, I think one of the ways, maybe my little brain likes to think of focus was, is that, our focus is like a spotlight. It's always on, it's always on something, but it's so easily, like, we used to kind of shift it slow, and now we think and we fool ourselves that we can multitask and shift things fast, but the lag and the residue and the thinking just slows our performance, that we don't really like to acknowledge that,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I put my phone down. It's like, yeah, you did 5 minutes ago, but that thought's still resonating of whatever the message
Yes.
was. And so
Yes. It's so good.
where do you talk to me a little bit about, obviously, being at the academy? I think, in my experiences with high school and college athletes, like, sometimes sports are just become the sacred space because we don't have the phone.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that in the academy environment, and how that plays in kind of peer-to-peer connection and communication development?
Yeah. Oh man, what a good question. Do we have another like 4 hours today to dig into it? Yeah. Um, yeah, and maybe to add to the complexity of the question, in a training environment like we have, where we are stratified by four years, so freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and they're called 4 degrees, 3 degrees, 2 degrees, and first degrees. There's a clear delineation between the four in terms of what privileges and rights they're entitled to as a student. And it's really a training model that says at its youngest phase, as our freshmen come in, you're learning to be a follower. And so you honor your leadership, you defer to your leadership, you learn leadership of self by watching and following orders. And then you begin to earn the right as you matriculate through your years here to lead others. So you have now a supervising role.
Yeah.
Then you begin to lead programs, and then you begin to oversee both the leadership of programs and people. And social connection can be stilted because the structure of formality and a hierarchy is in place. And at the same time, that's a parallel, certainly for the military, but I would say athletic teams, corporate structures,
Yeah.
systems have hierarchies involved. So training early and often how to be good followers, when to know how to step up and lead, and then ultimately when to be a good leader and empower your followers to be able to go do the work. But that is hard to learn. And our cadets don't live off base. They get very little time. They're not going home all summer to reconnect. They are here doing work. They're flying, they're jumping out of planes, they're launching satellites, they're taking classes, incredible stuff. So
Yeah.
in between all of the demand for academics, for military performance and sport performance, we want to try and foster community and connection. It's tough.
Yeah.
I think we have some lonely generations. I wonder if our generations feel that too. And perhaps I don't want to blame COVID. If I think if anything, it just highlighted and maybe reinforced that we've got some connection struggles here. And we try and foster connection. And I think it's a priority because we know how difficult it can be here. We do that through teamwork. We do that through shared strife and struggle. We want people of different class years being on the same field. Sometimes it's not an athletic field. Sometimes it's a military field, and they're out executing maneuvers, and they're trying to find locations out in the woods without much more than a compass and looking at the sun. But we put them in environments together where they've got to spend prolonged periods of time under some duress to learn how one another work. And just like we periodize physical conditioning, we want to rev up the environmental stress and the social stress. Then we need to wind it back down and have a recover period. We want a reconnection period. So these kind of ebbs and flows of training are intentional. There's time to come back and debrief, and we connect them with one another. What went well, what didn't go well. We share meals together. These are all programmed into the cadet life cycle, and it's certainly programmed in to sport as well. I want to mention too, when it comes to focus, but it's true here also, the good work of physical conditioning, like a deadlift, is in pulling that weight up, and controlled deceleration down is good too. But really the hardest part, if I just dropped weights all the time, that'd be easy. The hard part is pulling them up.
Yeah.
The same is true of social connection. The same is true of our focus. The good work is done when we realize that our spotlight of attention is not where it needs to be. That moment, oh, I got distracted again, and we pull it back to this moment. That is the hard work where we tear the muscle up so it can recover and grow stronger. The hard work of connection and building the social team is in thrashing around a bit. I mean, if everything's all good all the time, the strength and the durability, the flexibility of that relationship, I think, isn't nearly as strong as when we walk into challenge together and we say, I need you just as much as you need me. So I'm going to show up today for you. I'm going to show up, and maybe because I had a tough day, I'm only at 30%, but I'm going to give you all of my 30, and I'm going to be pretty open about that. Tyler, I've only got 30% today, but brother, I'm bringing all the 30. And you say, Dillon, I got you. You know, so we want to put them in those environments that stress and strain the hierarchy and also the social structure, because then it's in the recovery that we get stronger. Just like a deadlift, we really feel it. It's hard to pull it up, and then tear down the muscle a bit, and then we recover, and that's when we get stronger. We want to do that in the social milieu here too. So
I was reading, you're much more attuned in the academics of psychology, but I was reading something as more, they're saying that we actually do more learning in the reflection after we do. We always say we learn by doing, and it's actually the learning, and most of the learning takes place in the reflection after you've done the action.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it's like, and I was like, oh, that kind of, I think logically it started to make sense, but the doing is what provides us the ability for reflection. We don't have anything to reflect upon if we don't take some action and take some risk to try it.
Yes. Yes.
And I loved how you brought up that importance, that noticing. Years ago, at one of our PCA events, we had Dr. Carol Dweck, growth mindset, and
cool.
The question that I was like itching to ask her for years, and I'd asked her was, what do most people misunderstand about your work? And she said, yeah, everyone always talks about the growth mindset. Half the book is about fixed, and everyone wants to talk about the good growy stuff, but it's noticing when you start to get into the fixed, which is the most critical. And she's like, that's the point of the book that gets lost on people, is that's how we can actually make a shift. But we just want to stay in the comforty grow.
That's right.
And one thing, I guess, kind of I think it was Adam Grant that recently has shared something. I'd love to get your input on this, especially, kind of with all the learning and learning styles and different things at the academy. They're talking about, de-emphasizing the focus of learning styles. And
Yep.
that it's like with kids, we do this, oh, teach to what their perfect style is. Like, well, actually, you probably want to teach to the weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
what needs the help. And
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of, again, like you said, that rewiring that kind of created some gaps too
Yeah.
in this. Well, yeah, it's not comfortable to learn that way, so let's not do it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Tyler, it reminds me, if I were to go to the gym and I have a personal trainer there ready for me, they know me, they're just there all the time. I mean, that'd be incredible. But if I go there and they say, well, what are you the most fit at? And I say whatever it is, and they say, well, we're only going to do that, right? What we're going to do is play to your strengths, and we're only going to train in the way that you really enjoy or you feel the strongest at. I mean, that would not make any sense. I think even to the average person walking to a gym, winging it on their own, but certainly our strength conditioners would say, no way.
Right.
Why would that be true again of that physical structure of the brain? Okay, this person somehow some way likes visual learning better, so we're only going to give them the visual, or we're going to over index on visual learning. I think Adam Grant's pulling from some research. I think I saw that same little thing, and what he advocates for is that sometimes we learn more when we use a different learning style because it's calling us up.
Greater
It's calling,
focus.
that's exactly
Yeah.
right. It's calling us up and in. So it would make sense in the same way that we want a well-rounded fitness, we want a well-rounded mental conditioning set. We don't do that by only training what someone feels like they're more comfortable with. And I think there's a powerful message in this, that the discomfort that comes with training the body uh, is honored as almost sacred in our communities. Like we go hard, and we know what it feels like to push to burnout, or we know what it feels like to start to get heavy legs. We know this feeling, and we want to avoid that. I think as a culture, we're talking about stress reduction, stress mitigation. We want to lower the mental, I guess, load on our students, on us. And it may actually be that if we can lean into it, if we can press in and reconceptualize what that mental load is, and then have really intentional high quality rest recovery on the back end, and we do that over and over and over and over, that's probably where elite performance, just as a human, that's, I think, where that comes in.
Sure. One thing I wanted to come back to, you brought up was mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
in the military. I think when, a lot of coaches I know, they hear military academy, Air Force focus. Yeah, I get it. They're working on it. And when they hear mindfulness, they're like, what are they doing?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember an old study I think I read. It was more on meditation that they did with some elite forces years ago. But, they found over time that it was, increasing the gray matter in their brain, which is helpful in decision making, helpful in resisting fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But can you talk about what kind of some of the mindfulness and kind of, how that, how application in the
Yeah.
academy and athletics?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Tyler, we've given actually quite a number of trainings in mindfulness here. It's what's so fun. One of my favorite parts about it is after we're done, I will almost always, in fact, I can't think of one time that it didn't happen, that I had a line of cadets waiting to talk afterwards, and their feedback is almost always something like, man, when I saw that I had to come to this training, I was like so ready to check out, but I want more of what you're saying. I'm interested. This is good. There's something here. I think mindfulness is a tough one from like the 40,000 foot view, and most people just have access to mindfulness from that optic. It's like I just know the rough contours of what mindfulness is, and they're going to evaluate its utility for them based off of that.
Mm.
We've reframed mindfulness a bit to call it tactical attention. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard that kind of phraseology for it. we love to talk about it. Like you can leverage your attention so that you are lethally dialed in with all of the cognitive bandwidth focused on that singular mission in such a high quality way that your ability to make decisions, your ability to have some awareness, some intentionality, and then to have some grace for yourself and others in the moment, because you're kind of fully present and you're not judging what's happening. For our athletes, I'll often kind of build out a hypothetical profile of an athlete, and I'll describe one on the pitch that is so in the moment that they're not bothered by what just happened. They're not worried about what's going to happen in 50 seconds or 2 minutes. The eyes on the sideline are sort of fuzzy over there. They're just dialed into this moment, and they're playing with a joy and a lightness, but also a fierceness and intensity, because it's just about this moment right here. And then next to that person is someone who's worried about what's about to happen because they just got smoked and their touch has been bad and they've got a weird ache in their hip, and coach has been really tough on them, and if they're not starting to perform, they're going to get off the first team. Like, who do I want to compete against? Well, I want that person that's so stuck in their head and they're living in the future and the past and can't control the moment. I want that person all the time. I'm kind of afraid of the opponent that is just so dialed into the moment that they're going full tilt. Yeah. This is true in an airframe. This is true looking down a scope. This is true of parenting. I've felt this as a parent now. What we talk about then is so often, because of a lot of reasons, our focus, our attention, our concentration, our self-worth is tied up in things that have already happened. We can't change them. There's a time and space to go deal with those if we can't get over them. And it's lovely to be able to go revisit and kind of wonder and heal some of that. But in a moment of consequence, it does not help us to be stuck in a moment in the past. And then we also write stories about the future. So we tie our self-worth to something that is in the future, and we're not sure what the outcome is, but we're pretty darn sure it's going to be negative. And boy, if you're making tough decisions and you want all the access to your training, but you're living in the future of the past, I don't want you flying my plane. I'm worried about you and my plane.
Yeah.
That's a lot of how we frame it initially. And we get great interest in it there. And then we really talk about training the mental fitness of your attention and concentration. And so can you, with intentionality, take that spotlight of attention? Can you make it very broad in this room right now? Can we really like twist the handle, expand the aperture so you've got this diffuse light all over the place? Can you hear it? Can you sense it? Good. Now let's bring it really, really intensely focused somewhere. And it might be their breath. It might be on something out in front of them. And then we map that on. If you're a keeper in goal, can you have this broad attention? And as defenders are challenging and driving forward, can you start to bring that focus in, almost visualize it in that way? And they'll start to recognize, like, yeah, I kind of want that, but it's tough for me. And I'll say, yeah, imagine if we were going to go do some crazy skill that you've never trained. You would never expect yourself to be able to do it right away. So I'll say, we got to train it. And then I'll kind of make a training plan for them in how to dial in that focus to feel like they've got much more control. And then over time, really gain a lot of the control over it.
Yeah, I love that. I know episodes ago I had George Mumford on that worked with Michael Jordan and Kobe on mindfulness, and then there's a one of the writers in that Jordan documentary on Netflix, and he makes the point how he followed him for years and was like, the most special thing that made him was his ability just to be in the present moment. Like you literally couldn't get him to think about the next game. Like it's like, that's what made him. And it's like, it's interesting. Someone that observed him, for 2 decades. And it's like, that's what made him basketball. Yeah. He's good at that, but that's what, like, he could just have that spotlight locked in.
For most of us too, Tyler, those moments where we're just able to be so immersed in the moment itself, We have to train. Like this is, you can't just growth mindset yourself into success. You can't just mindfulness yourself into success. We got to train it. But when we put in the hard work, we put in the training, we put in the hours and the reps, and we're able to dial into that moment. For most of us, we'd all agree that that is, if I could just paint a picture of me at my optimal, it would be, I'm light, I'm smooth, it's flow, it just comes. I'm not thinking, I have no real fear or worry. There's a energy, there's an excitement, and it's just happening. Well, gosh, that's it. That's mindfulness. There's something
Yeah.
so powerful about being able to just be in that moment. There's a Far Side. You heard of the Far Side cartoon? You know
Yeah.
those? There's
Yeah.
one where there's a cow. It's a whole bunch of cows in a field. They're all eating grass, and one of them's looking up, and he yells to the other guys like, "Wait a minute! This is grass. We've been eating grass." It's like he awakens to something. Like for so long we've just been doing this without really any thought or intention on why. And for me that resonated with like phone use. So what, I think, oh, I'm going to check the weather, and the next thing I know I'm like reading some article about some minor league team in my old hometown, and it's fine, there's a time and place for that, but it takes me out of the moment entirely. And I know for me, the more that I can get sucked into something like that, the more draw or pull I have to use that when I'm working out, and I'm like, I can just pull my phone out between a set, or I'm with my kids, we're playing a board game and we're taking too long, and I can like feel the tug to want to pull myself out of the moment. And it's like there's an awakening. Wait, I'm just, this is grass. We're eating. What are we doing?
That's great.
So
I like that.
mindfulness for me is that it's like an honoring that this moment, these kids, this sport, this client that's with me, they deserve my full presence. And boy, that's what I want to be able to bring.
If we wrap up, if you could go visit younger Dillon and
Mm,
all the things you've learned in your journey and amazing people you've got to work alongside and with,
yeah.
um, what would you want to tell teenage self about all the things you've learned about the brain and
Yeah.
the field?
It, yeah. Tyler, it's funny you bring that up too. We often use that as a kind of like an intervention, I'll call it. Someone will come in and they're really hard on themselves about something that happened, and we'll gently work it back to remember the developmental phases of them in sport. Or if they've got a younger brother and sister, I'll say, do you remember them learning to walk? And if when that 1 year old or 9 month old started to crawl and walk and stumbled and fall, but what they don't do is look at themselves and say like, oh, I can't do this, I'm so embarrassed. And what you don't do as their sibling is yell at them like, you'll never be good enough.
Never
They just,
walk.
yeah, they just get back up and they do it. And there's Michael Gervais is a sports psychologist, and yes, I think we all know of him, but he's got a really lovely statement. He says something like, if we all let ourselves honor our being, we learn to be more, and we let the doing flow from that. There's some high quality doing, but it's really out of this deep core that's so fulfilling. I mean, a lot of us push doing, and we get our sense of being because we feel
Yeah.
like we need to do more, right? It's the doing versus being. And along with that is a spirit of like trusting yourself, to be able to be okay being something. And sometimes that's thrashy. That, Tyler, that would be it. I would go back, and we've all had tough periods of life. My parents divorced. We moved around a lot. We had like kind of I have three little brothers. We were in a 1 bedroom apartment, just a lot of stuff in young elementary school that was really tough for me and tough for my brothers, tough for my family. Um, and I think we're all formed through those things, and there's goodness to be had from it, even in the tough stuff. But I would go back and I would say something like that. I think I would say like, Dillon, um, you can trust yourself in these moments that it will work out and you'll be able to figure it out. So I would worry a lot about the future, and that was because my future felt uncertain. It was just, I was like, man, I don't know what do we have in that fridge for lunch even. Trust yourself to figure it out. And there's something in there then too about really being able to honor and be okay with being something. And sometimes that being is not packaged and not pretty. It isn't necessarily something you want to go present forward. And so it pushes us to want to do more. And we think that will help satisfy that part of us that feels a little messy. And so for a long time, that was me. It's like very people pleasing, very type A, goal oriented, feeling like we need to go more, go faster, go harder. Um, we learn a lot in those periods, and I think for a lot of ways that's made me who I am, and I'm thankful for them. And yet, I think too, there could have been such a grace and a peace about thrashing through the difficulty. Wouldn't have taken away the difficulty, but being able to say to that younger Dillon, that you can have a trust that you're going to figure this out. And at the same time, sometimes it just doesn't go the way you wanted and it doesn't feel good. But being in that moment and being okay with yourself in it, and then deciding to take the next steps is a powerful way ahead, instead of trying to just clean everything up, make everyone feel happy, do, so that I can be, and let your doing come out of there. A little more esoteric, I suppose, but yeah.